Week 4 did not disappoint. What a Saturday of college football we just witnessed yesterday. And I was looking ahead at the schedule thinking this is probably the best Saturday of the season. But look ahead to Week 11. Week 11 might be even better. But we're going to stay right here at Week 4. I can't talk about every single team, obviously. I'll talk about teams a little bit more when I do my top 25. But we're just going to take a look at the 5 biggest takeaways, my 5 biggest takeaways from Week 4. And we'll start with number 1. The Big Ten East has a real shot at ending in a 3-way tie. And this really doesn't have much to do with the Ohio State-Notre Dame game because that's not a conference game. But I'm just going to talk about these 3 Big Ten teams in this part right here. So we'll start with Ohio State. Obviously, just a clutch victory over Notre Dame. What a game that was. Really felt like in that second half, Notre Dame was going to win. I mean, I felt like they were the better team in the second half, and Ohio State just kept hanging in there, and the defense played really well all game long, and they got their opportunity, and they came through when they had to. And so the Buckeyes now in a really good spot to get to the college football playoff. But again, we're talking more about the Big Ten here in this takeaway. I just look at Ohio State, as good as they have been on defense, and the offense, which I think will get better and better. And I look at Penn State, the way they have played. They've been, to me, probably the most impressive team in the country consistently every week, really bringing it. And then you look at Michigan, and we know what we're going to get from them. But they maybe haven't looked quite as good as we thought. It's early, and they tend to do this. Look at the last couple of years early on, maybe some question marks, and then they come through late. And so I just look at those 3 teams, and there was obviously a real scenario. Some people predicted this scenario to happen where they each will beat the other team, and they all finish with 1 loss. And I think that's a very real possibility. And now, again, you add in Ohio State beating Notre Dame, so they would have 1 loss overall and 1 loss in the conference. So you'd have 3 legitimate playoff contenders, a 3-way tie. And again, I just really was impressed with the toughness of Ohio State, the mental toughness to come through in the clutch when they had to, and then Penn State, the consistency that they played with, and Michigan getting a big win over Rutgers, although they didn't play great in that game, but I think Rutgers is actually pretty good this year, so I'm going to give them some credit for that win. But again, my big takeaway here is just that all 3 of those teams look like they could be top 5 teams, and a lot of people, again, thought that would be the case in the preseason, and it may be playing out that way. It's going to take a pretty big upset for those teams to lose to anyone else. It's just a question of, is Michigan going to be able to win both of their games against the other 2 teams, or do they all split? Does Ohio State win both of their games? Does Penn State win both of their games? That's going to be really fun to watch, and one of the biggest stories really for the playoff race, and then, of course, in the Big Ten as well. All right, number 2 takeaway. The SEC West might be in the same exact spot with Alabama, LSU, and Texas A&M. So I'm going to talk about those 3 teams really quick. Remember, Texas beat Alabama and Florida State beat LSU, but those were not conference games. So everyone in the Big Ten, from these 3 teams, every team in the SEC West at the top, Alabama, LSU, and Texas A&M, they don't have a conference loss. And Texas A&M lost to Miami. So all 3 of these teams actually have a non-conference loss, but they don't have a conference loss. And they all, I think, could beat up on each other, and it could be a very similar scenario to the Big Ten East. The difference here would be, though, all these teams would have 2 overall losses, and they're probably not going to be in the college football playoffs. So the Big Ten is actually in a much better place. The Big Ten East is in a much better place than the SEC West to get to the college football playoff. But again, Alabama, I talked about it. I felt like with Milroe back at quarterback, they would take care of business against Ole Miss. A lot of people didn't agree with that. I'm telling you, Nick Saban knew what he was doing. If he had wanted to beat South Florida and beat them easier, he would have played Milroe, but he was sending a message to his team, and I think even to the fans as well. Milroe gives them a great option, and their defense is still really, really good. Now, can they beat the elite teams? Could they go out and beat a Georgia with Milroe at quarterback? I don't think so, because I think you've got to be able to have a little bit more in the pass game. But they're good enough in the run game and on defense to where they can still maybe get to 10-2 at the end of the season. And let's say they lose to Texas A&M, and then Texas A&M loses to LSU. I'm telling you, there's a very real scenario where we have a 3-way tie in the SEC West. LSU has been really inconsistent this year. They looked absolutely fantastic against Mississippi State, but then against Arkansas this past week, barely getting by and winning that game. But that game's always close. So, it's hard to really judge a whole lot off of that. Texas A&M, they seem to have found their defense, played really, really well on that side of the ball against Auburn. Connor Wigman goes down with the injury, but Max Johnson is a veteran quarterback, a guy that I think can be really good for them. So I'm not even really concerned about that. They get Alabama at home in a couple of weeks. That's going to be a huge opportunity for them. And I'm telling you, we could see a three-way tie in the SEC West. The only difference is these three teams that I think could be tied, all of them lost a non-conference game. So the Big Ten in a much better shape as far as the college football playoff goes. Of course, Georgia in the East, they're in the driver's seat over there. Let's go to number 3 now. Florida State, clearly the new top dog in the ACC. They surpassed Clemson. They beat Clemson. Clemson might not be done, though, in that conference. So we'll start with Florida State. This was a team, you could see it coming. I was very high on this team in the preseason. And I think the addition of Keon Coleman and what they've got on the defensive line, they've got playmakers. They have got playmakers. Clemson, to me, really outplayed Florida State for the most part in this game, but Florida State made the big plays. They had the big hit on Klubnik, the defensive touchdown. Keon Coleman goes up, makes that catch in overtime. Clemson made some mistakes, missed the field goal. And again, I felt like Clemson overall played better than Florida State, but Florida State made those big plays, and that's the difference. They've got big-time playmakers, and this is a Florida State team that might not lose. You look at the rest of their schedule, Miami could be a tough game coming up, but they might not lose. They could actually go undefeated, run the table into the ACC championship. What if they play Clemson again? So I think a lot of people will probably going to say, well, Clemson's done. They've lost 2 games. You've got North Carolina. You've got Duke. You've got Miami. One of these teams is going to finish with 1 loss. Probably not, if we're being honest here. Louisville in that conversation as well. Clemson's going to have to win out, but if Clemson wins out, I think they probably will get to the ACC championship, and then they'll have a chance to go in as underdogs and knock off Florida State. I was really impressed with Clemson. Again, some mistakes cost them this game, but Cade Klubnik played really well for the most part. The wide receivers made a lot of big catches, something that really we have not seen from Clemson in the last year or two. I thought the receivers stepped up, even with some guys out with injuries. So I was really impressed with Clemson in this game, but Florida State, they make those big plays, and you have to do that to win these big games. Now, an interesting number here. I picked Clemson to win this game, 27-24. If Clemson hits that field goal at the end, the score would have been 27-24. Of course, Florida State might have came down and tied it and went to overtime or whatever. But again, I think Clemson really proved themselves in this game. I don't want to make this I don't want to talk about Clemson because Florida State, they won the game. They deserve the credit here. But really, both teams impressed me. I felt like both of these teams are really good teams. Of course, Clemson lost that game to Duke, and just so many mistakes cost them in that game. I feel like they're a much better team than they showed in that game. And like I said, if Clemson wins out, I think they're going to be in the ACC championship, and we could see a rematch of that game, and it could be another classic. So we'll see how that goes. Tough schedule for Clemson. I don't know if they can get it done, but Florida State, they're in the driver's seat. Even if you lose a game, still probably going to go to the conference championship, or definitely going to go to the conference championship. But I don't know if they lose another game. This Florida State team is legit. They are good. Next up, number 4, Colorado. They're not a contender, but the Pac-12 is. And that's my takeaway here. I don't want to talk about Colorado too much because I'm sure many of you are sick of hearing about Colorado. But they proved that they're just nowhere near being in that top tier of the Pac-12. They've beaten some decent teams, but now that they finally played a really good team, they just don't have it. They're just not good enough. The offensive line's not good enough. The defense is not good enough. They've got great playmakers, and they've been better than I think most people expected. If you go back to my preseason predictions on Colorado, I did not pick them to go to a bowl game, but what did I say? I said, the offense will be able to score. They've got playmakers, but I'm concerned about the offensive line, and I'm concerned about the defense, and it's really played out that way. I didn't expect them to beat TCU like they did, but other than that, it's played out about how I expected, and they're just not a contender. I didn't know until I saw this game, though, because I was questioning myself, thinking, maybe this team can actually be a contender in the Pac-12, but they're just not going to be. They're going to probably lose a few more games, but still looking like a really good season for year one here with Deion Sanders in Colorado. But let's talk about just the Pac-12 here. Oregon, really impressive in this game. Look, Colorado's a good team. They may not be a top 10 team, but they're still a good team. And the way Oregon dominated this game was really, really impressive. They've already gone on the road and beat Texas Tech. Washington has been dominant. They've looked really, really good. Look at Washington State. They have looked really good. Utah, when they get Cam Rising back, when they actually have an offense to go with their defense, Utah going to be very dangerous. USC, not great this week, but we still know about the talent they have. And so you just look at this Pac-12, and I've been saying it all year, this conference is loaded. And if they don't beat up on themselves too much and they can get a one-loss team out of that conference, that team is going to be a threat in the college football playoff. I'll go ahead and tell you right now, if it's Oregon, if it's Washington, if it's USC, even if it's Utah, if they can get a team to come out of there with one loss, which I think is going to be tough because I think the teams are going to beat up on each other, but if they can, I'm telling you, this Pac-12, it's legit this year, and they have proven it. Oregon, very impressive on Saturday. And then we go to the final takeaway. So Texas and North Carolina, they're different this year. This is maybe something under the radar. Most people probably didn't really think about these two teams much this weekend with all the big games. But I said this in my upset alert video. These were the games. Texas on the road at Baylor. North Carolina on the road at Pitt. These are the games that these two teams typically would lose. You just go back to the last few years. These teams have looked really good at times, and then they've just been inconsistent at times, and they've lost these types of games. Texas, very impressive against Baylor. North Carolina, very impressive against Pittsburgh. So go ahead right now, and I think you can just take out that, well, Texas is going to lose a couple of games that they shouldn't. North Carolina is going to lose a couple of games that they shouldn't. These teams are different, and I feel like both teams are teams you need to watch out for. I think Texas already has everyone's attention because they've beaten Alabama. If they can beat Oklahoma, I don't know if anyone can beat them this year. And they're a real threat to get to the college football playoff. And just this one game showed me that they're not going to, maybe they do, maybe I jinxed them and they will have a letdown down the road. But I really feel like they're going to be able to take care of business in their games, except, again, Oklahoma could be a tough one. And then North Carolina, same thing. Just really impressed with them. Now, they've got some tough games on their schedule, a little bit tougher than Texas. But the fact that they were able to take care of business in a tricky road game. I know Pitt hasn't been great, but I'm telling you, these are just the types of games that North Carolina has lost. This is a team that I think can maybe get to 10-2 and get to that ACC championship. I don't know if they're going to be a playoff contender, but I'm not going to doubt them at this point. They've looked good so far. They've got some big wins. The App State game wasn't great, but still, maybe that was a bit of a fluke for whatever reason. They seem to struggle with App State. Minnesota, they dominated that game. They dominated South Carolina. So I'm watching out for Texas and North Carolina this year to not have that slump, not have that rough patch, and both teams finish strong and actually be maybe top 10 teams this year, and maybe more than that, especially for Texas. So those are my takeaways. Again, a lot of games I could have talked about, but I just wanted to kind of cram it all into these 5 takeaways, and we'll talk about these teams more on my top 25 tomorrow. Give me your takeaways from week 4 down in the comments below.